Hello, hello, hello. Hello, my name is Noel, for those of you who haven't met me yet. I don't need this fork for the presentation, that's for something else. So here we are for our first Art of Sound back from the break with Dr. Ben Carey, who yes, hey, thank you, welcome. So Ben works predominantly and is known for his work with modular synthesis, both in composition and in performance. And what is special about modular is that the technology itself acts as an agent as part of shaping what happens in composition and in performance. In fact, I would liken modular performance more to a jazz ensemble kind of modality, in that jazz where the players know each other very well. Ben knows his equipment incredibly well. He has a bit of a plan. He has a few little things set up in his modular, but he doesn't know specifically what's going to happen, and nor do we in the audience. And I'm guessing that we're going to see Ben enter into a bit of a flow state. You've probably heard that expression before, where he's immersed inside the machine, and the thoughts going through his mind are more about understanding what he's got, where he's going. He's sort of running, he's sort of mapping his way through the trees. And I don't know, am I off track there, do you think? So from a performance perspective, it is very unique. And every performance is completely different. Because the machine and what happens then tells him what's going to happen next. So back to jazz, the players have an idea in general where they're going, but they don't know what notes they're playing. Okay, so what they play then influences what happens next. So it's going to be a bit of a journey, but I think Ben's going to start with a little bit of an explanation about his setup and where he's coming from musically, philosophically, and then he's going to jam out for about half an hour, then there's questions. Now, one thing to keep in mind, he's going to have a short break at the end of this, and then at 2 o'clock, we're going to open the curtains and reveal a whole bunch of wonderful synthesizers that we have in our collection. So the first years here. Next semester, you're going into a unit called Sound Design, where you do learn synthesis. This is a really good opportunity to have access to someone like Ben. I don't know, I'd rank you in top 2, top 3 synth dude in the land. So stick around, take advantage of access to Ben with our synthesizers, and you can get hands-on, and he'll talk through different techniques. So that's enough for me. All right, thank you, Ben.
Just going to move this over here, if that's all right. Okay, hi everyone, really nice to be here. I'm going to start this performance demonstration with a little bit of a talk about who I am, my practice, give a couple of examples of things, and then I'm going to sit down and perform, as Noel said, for about half an hour. So my background, I'm actually a trained saxophonist, a classical saxophonist. That's how I got my start in music. I started composing probably about 15 to 16 years ago when I started getting interested in electronic music. And firstly, for me, electronic music was a way of finding a connection between my saxophone playing, improvising with a computer, and trying to, I guess, teach a computer to listen to what a performer's doing and to respond in kind. So I developed software, I performed with the software and myself and other people. And then probably about 10 years ago, I stumbled into the world of modular synthesis, and that's primarily my practice these days, although I'm still working with electronic music using Max MSP and other software, Ableton, etc., in other parts of my practice. So this part of the session, this talk, I'm calling Metastable Inventions, Composing, Inventing, and Performing with Metastable Systems. So what is a modular synthesizer? Has anyone used a modular synth before or is aware of what one is? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, one person, a couple of people. All right, awesome. So a modular synthesizer, what you see up here, this is a special modular synth to me. This is the Surge Latrobe Paperface. It's down at a place called Melbourne Electronic Sound Studio. It dates back to 1975, but modular synthesizers have been around since about the 1960s. You may have heard of Robert Moog and the Moog synthesizer, the Moog Voyager, the Mini Moog, etc. Modular synths have been around since before synthesizers had keyboards, and that's a really important thing to say. So what you do with a modular synthesizer is it comes blank like this with a whole bunch of patch points, and you use cables to determine the routing of the synthesizer, what sound goes into which output module, how you shape that sound using filters, envelopes, random generators, these kinds of things. And you start to build up a bit of a network, and that modular synth patch, that we call it, becomes either a performance instrument or it becomes a vehicle for composition and sound design. Okay? So for me, I moved into modular synths coming from computer music for a desire for tactile control over these unwieldy machines. I had been playing my saxophone, and I started putting my sax down and spending more time actually coding up interesting things in the computer. But I wanted to work with complexity and surprise with a system like this. So I started experimenting, buying little modules, and then over time building up a larger system. But for me, what's really important musically is that these interactions between all of these components, as Noel was mentioning before, they're different every time, and they really, I guess, privilege a way of thinking about structuring music from the bottom up. You're really thinking one decision at a time, and then by the end, whether or not you're doing a performance or recording something, you have something that you couldn't have expected from the start. So it kind of short circuits that part of a composer's brain that says, I know everything, I've got this goal in mind, and instead of thinking that way, you're actually discovering music within the voltages. So modular synthesis, I want to give you a couple of definitions. Modularity, the use of individually distinct functional units as in assembling an electronic or mechanical system. So modularity meaning that we can actually, each time we sit down, we're setting up networks that are different each time. It's a modular environment. And then in terms of synthesis, often when we think of synthesizers or sound synthesis, we think of trying to reach a particular goal. I like to think of synthesis more in the more general term, and that is what the Oxford English Dictionary says is the combination of components or elements to form a connected whole. So when we put these two together, we see that we've got a way of creating music and a way of performing that is really interoperable. It changes each time, and it's very complex and diverse. So enough talking. I'm going to show a little example of a patch. This is two systems of mine. On the left-hand side, you've got the Eurorack system, which I've got in front of me. And on the right, there's what's called a Surge system, which is a modern recreation of that big synth I showed before. This particular patch is a studio patch that plays itself, so I'm not actually sitting there performing it. I set up a bunch of parameters and then I let it go. I'm really interested in the kind of push and pull between these processes and how a system like this can create surprise when I press go and record and see what happens. So here's an example of these two systems that are pushing and pulling against each other. So that's an example of quite a complex patch. There's a lot of detail in there. It gets stuck in these kind of interesting, quite random cycles, which I really like. Cycles that are unpredictable, but they come back every now and again slightly changed. And I'm really interested in stereo movement as well, this kind of throwing a sound around a space. And there's a lot of connections between this kind of composition and, I guess, forms of sound design that you might find in movies and other kind of media. So in my work, with modular synths, I guess there's 3 strands of practice that I'm involved in. One is improvised modular performance, which I'm going to show you after I have a little chat. And that is kind of setting up systems that are building instruments that I can then perform in front of people. Another is exploring and composing with historical systems. So as I mentioned, modulars have been around since about the 1960s. Robert Moog and Donald Buchler were 2 of the first in the States to build modular synths. And I've been exploring a lot of modular synths from this era, both here in Australia, but also in a number of places overseas. And it's interesting to spend time with these systems and then to import that knowledge back to my own practice. And then also theoretical reflections and analysis of practice. A lot of what I do in my work, I'm a researcher as well, is to think about what it actually means for the composer to be working with this kind of complexity in their practice and what connections there are to different philosophical traditions as well. So in a nutshell, for me, I find that modular synthesizers are machines for building machines. And what do I mean by that? A modular synth is a machine, as you can see here. There's a whole bunch of cables, patch cables, knobs, etc. But what I'm doing here in this sped up version of a patch is I'm actually building a machine, and that particular machine is bespoke to that particular performance scenario, which means that every time I get on the instrument, it's a different instrument. So in that way, compositional method or performance practice is really a form of instrument building. That's how I see my practice. Every time I sit down at the instrument, I'm actually building a new instrument and then navigating its affordances. As Noel was saying, I'm not sure exactly what's going to come out, but I kind of know what the network can bring. And so in terms of some of the theory, I've been looking at this philosopher from France, Gilbert Simondon, and his ideas of technical invention. If we're building an instrument every time we sit down, really what we're doing is engaging a form of technical invention. We're inventing something. And so Simondon has been looking at these ideas with technology, was looking at lots of different technologies throughout the 20th century. And he considers technical invention to be part of a human-machine network. He says to invent is to make one's thought function as a machine might function, neither according to causality, which is too fragmentary, nor according to finality, which is too unitary, but according to the dynamism of lived functioning, grasped because it is produced, accompanied in its genesis. And so what I think he means here about this dynamism of lived functioning is rather than thinking about going towards a particular end goal, when we're inventing technically, we have to be amongst the voltages and amongst the technologies that we're working with and to follow their dynamism to where it's going to lead next. So this brings up quite a non-hierarchical view of technical practice. So meaning rather than mastery over the technical world, we're actually part of that technology that we're working with. He says, for there to be a true technical ensemble, which is a bunch of technologies working together, man has to play a functional role between machines rather than above them. A lot of this work has also got me thinking about intention. When I sit down at the machine, I've been talking about that I'm not sure exactly what's going to come out. And a lot of this makes me think about where my musical intentions are. If I don't have a particular goal or I'm letting the machine guide me, what does that actually mean for my intentionality? All right. And so there's a theory called material engagement theory, which is by a cognitive archaeologist called Lambros Malafouris. And he's really interested in how materials, whether they be technologies or clay or hand axes or whatever, actually stand before and cause intentions, or they're intermingled with human intentions. He has this beautiful article where he's talking about pottery, for instance, and he says that the clay and its physical affordances stands before and causes the potter's intention about growing a vessel out of it. So it's a different way of thinking about artistic practice. Rather than having an intention going to the technology or the materials and realizing it, it's actually about this interplay between the human and the materials, and surprise comes out. In terms of intentions, he says that human intentions are always in competition and in confederation with many other strivings. For an intention is like a pebble thrown into a pond or an electrical current sent through a wire or neural network. It vibrates and merges with other currents to affect and be affected. So moving on from this more theoretical way of thinking, I want to talk a little bit about improvised modular performance, which you'll hear. As I mentioned, I'm building up these systems that I perform with live. It's quite different to my studio practice, which involves building often patches that kind of play themselves, or I snip out certain things and then edit them as you would in any other composition in a DAW. So I want to show you an example of this. This is a duo of mine with the Darawal and Inuit vocalist Sonia Hollowell. We're called Some Conduit. This performance was done at a series called Together in Art, which was done at the Art Gallery in New South Wales during the pandemic, when the art gallery was actually closed to visitors. The art gallery invited artists in to engage with art on the walls and to make music in collaboration with some of the art that's there. So here's a little example of Together in Art. Okay, I'm going to stop that one there. So quite a different aesthetic to what you were hearing before with the more complex dynamic self-playing patch. The reason why I wanted to show you this one is because a lot of my live work, especially with Sonia and with other players, has a kind of a larger, expansive sense of form. But also when you're playing with someone else, this work that I was saying where you're not sure exactly what's going to come out of the instrument really comes into its own. Often there'll be a sound or a particular tone that I bring out of the instrument that Sonia latches onto and then harmonizes with, either kind of complementing the sound or pushing against it and being quite dissonant with that. And you hear that at the very end of that particular excerpt where I'm bringing in what is actually feedback. I'm feeding a filter back on itself. And so it's very hard to predict what the tone's going to be, what the pitch is going to be. But it happened to just sit right underneath, a semitone underneath what Sonia was doing. So it's these moments of tension and surprise which really move a performance forward. And so I feel like when we're playing together, There's two of us, but there's also a third agency, which is the synthesizer. So when I'm patching for modular performance, I'm often kind of reaching forwards towards performance. As I mentioned, I'm not sure exactly what the outcome's going to be, but as I'm patching up from this low level, deciding which oscillator goes into which filter and how I'm going to shape that, certain modes of interacting with the system start to reveal themselves. So, I think that this would be a really great thing for me to have dynamic control over, or this thing I need to switch on and off really quickly, for instance. And I don't really know what they're going to be until I hear the sounds themselves. These patches then solidify, but they also need to remain open. I think of Gilbert Simondon again and his idea of open machines, or les machines ouvertes, which are these machines that are sensitive to outside information, and they need to be able to shift and change with information that's coming in. And for me, that's my ideas and the things that I'm hearing as I'm performing. And then in terms of structuring things, I feel like performance is a form of unfurling structure. So that structure doesn't exist when I get on stage, but the potential of what the instrument can provide is something that I start to unfurl as I perform. As I hear one thing, I decide I need to go into this direction and this direction. So it's quite similar to, I guess, playing with what would be known as a graphic score or an interactive score. The machine itself has embedded within it some form of musical structure that I have to discover on stage. So often what I'm doing is I'm surfacing materials, knowing broadly how something will sound, but not the details. I'm thinking about textural density. There's a lot of density and a lot of texture in the work that I do that you can hear. I'm also thinking about how I can make certain parts of the synth be able to do more than one thing. So this is what we call one-to-many or a many-to-one mapping. I'm navigating certain territories. So for instance, an oscillator that makes a tone might be a pitch at one point in the performance, or it might be a rhythm, depending on how fast or slow the oscillator is. And then also different forms of control, as I was mentioning, textural, slow textural control, percussive control. I actually use a lot of percussive physical interactions with the instrument as well. I just want to show one more example, and this is an example of a performance, an improvised performance on this system here. This is a film made by Matt McGuigan of Hospital Hill. We recorded this improvised performance 3 times in the same day, so it was slightly different each time, about 7 minutes long. And Matt filmed these performances at different times of the day in this large warehouse space so he could capture different lighting states. And then through some kind of magical editing, he was able to make it look like I was actually controlling the light. So here's just an example of a piece called Surfacing. And that just gives you a taste of that particular piece. This one you can find on Vimeo or on my website if you want to watch the whole thing. I love the way that he edits that. It feels really quite seamless, that it's part of this human-machine network, which is kind of interesting. So I did have some other things that I wanted to talk about in terms of historical machines, but I better get on and actually play for you. So I'm going to do a performance now on this system, and I'll leave a little bit of time for questions. I might describe the system that I'm working with and how I've set up the patch. And then afterwards, as Noel mentioned, there's a whole bunch of historical machines and newer machines behind this curtain that we're going to have a workshop on at about 2 o'clock. So I'll just get set up, and thanks very much. It will be a lot better in the middle, so do take a bit of time to do that. that's me done. Thank you so much for having me. As Noel was mentioning, we're going to have a workshop here. If anyone has any questions, I'm here to answer them. I'm happy to go through some of the stuff that I've done here, or we can leave that for the workshop portion. It's
yeah, well, if you want to take, 5-minute break or something,
yep.
and then they can come back to do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
But sorry, getting the whole thing as well. Just want to thank Ben very much. So so many sci-fi and horror soundtracks were going through my body as you were doing that. But also thank you very much to Mitchell and to Alex for setting up and running today. Thank you. And also to Western Sydney Creative for funding the Art of Sound series. It's a terrific thing that we get to bring in people at such a high level of their craft with that additional funding to, so you guys get to see all sorts of crazy stuff. Great, so probably take a 5-minute break, but stick around or go to the bathroom, whatever, come back, and shall we do the reveal?
Let's do the reveal.
Okay, so
remove the screen off.
Reveal. Thank you, Alex. So there's your reveal. That's what you get to play with.